Our next question has to do with giving. For many, this issue is not very popular, especially when it's connected with the Old Testament teaching about tithing. So this listener asks, what about tithing? Is it for today?
Now, I would like to say that under grace today, that we are on a different basis altogether. Paul told the Corinthians, you'll recall in the 16th chapter, when he was going to come to visit them, he says, now concerning the collection for the saints, as I've given order to the churches of Galatia, even so do ye. Upon the first day of the week, let every one of you lay by him in store, as God hath prospered him, that there be no gatherings when I come. Now, Paul made it very clear in that particular passage that he was not asking for tithes, but that actually he was asking for a gift as God had prospered them. And I believe that giving today should be put on that scale, that as God has prospered you, that's the way you're to give. And I believe that there are many Christians today that are giving the tithe when they ought to be giving at least 2, 3, 4, 5 tenths to the Lord's work, because God has prospered them that way. And we ought not to be attempting to accumulate a large sum of money to leave for relatives to fight over after we're gone. And right now we need to be putting money into the Lord's work. But the important thing is this matter of the principle of giving, the basis of it. Now, I have received any number of letters, and so many of them use the argument that if the church would tithe today, why, we'd be able to carry out all the mission program, and we'd be able to take care of all the radio programs and all that sort of thing. And I grant you that's true, but that's not the motive for giving to the Lord at all. The motive is altogether different today under grace. Now, back under the law, God required not just 1/10. Obviously, there were about 3/10 that were required. You see, Israel was a theocracy, and the government of Israel was a government whereby the priests and the judges, until the time of the king, they were the ones that controlled the people and ran the government. And there was tithes given for that purpose, so that it's estimated today that at least Israel gave about 3/10 actually to the Lord's work, and it was required. Now I'm going to turn over to 2 Corinthians and pass on here God's basis, principle by which we're to give. Now he writes, and I'm reading the 8th chapter of 2 Corinthians, and I'm going to read an extended section here. Will you listen? Moreover, brethren, we do you to wit of the grace of God bestowed on the churches of Macedonia, how that in a great trial of affliction, the abundance of their joy and their deep poverty abounded unto the riches of their liberality. For to their power I bear record, yea, and beyond their power they were willing of themselves, praying us with much entreaty, that we would receive the gift and take upon us the fellowship of the ministering to the saints. And this they did, not as we hoped, but first gave their own selves to the Lord and unto us by the will of God. Now, let me make this statement, that today it's so much easier and nicer to say, give a tenth to the Lord's work. And these cults that enforce that, they're doing well financially. I grant you that. But is that the way that we're to give? Notice how the Macedonians gave, and Paul cites them to the Corinthians as an example. They first gave themselves to the Lord. Now, the Lord wants you before he wants what you give. I wish I could get that over to people today. We have folk, actually, that tell us this, that, well, my ministry is giving. And they say, I don't feel that I should do anything else. They don't witness. Their lives are not cleaned up, by the way. Their language is not cleaned up. and they continue living just as they did before, and they say, well, I'm giving to the Lord's work, and this is my ministry. Now, may I say to you, the Lord doesn't want what you've got. He wants you. And until he gets you, I don't think that he wants anything from you. And I don't think you can give him anything. Now, you can give us something, and we'll appreciate it. I'll be very frank with you. But we're talking now from the Lord's viewpoint. The Lord wants you, and he wants your hand before he wants the work of your hand. He wants your heart before he wants the giving of your heart. He wants you. And when he gets you, then I don't think you'd have any problem of getting something from you. Now, Paul goes on to speak in 2 Corinthians, the 8th chapter. He says, for we know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, that ye through his poverty might be rich. And herein I give my advice, and this is expedient for you, who have begun before not only to do, but also to be forward a year ago. Now therefore perform the doing of it. In other words, Paul says, now that you've given yourself to Christ, and you're not keeping books with him now, you're not giving him a tenth because he's demanded it. You're giving to him out of a heart of love. And I believe when you do that, it's going to be more than a tenth. But I do think there are some people today that are actually in poverty and not required to give that tenth. Now, I know that hurts because a great many organizations today are just insisting that you give a tenth to it. And Paul went on to say that this matter of giving is a matter of bounty and not of covetousness, and that if you sow sparingly, you're going to reap sparingly. And that's in the Lord's work today. Now, these are the great principles on which we're to be governed today. One of the reasons that some of us are so poor today is simply because we have been so stingy with God's work, because we're told, every man according as he purposeth in his heart, so let him give, not grudgingly or of necessity, not because you feel like you have to give a tenth. For God loveth a cheerful giver. And this is a grace that he gives to you. And grace giving is different than legal giving, my friend. Now, I trust that I've touched on this subject and that it might be helpful, at least that I might be understood.